No one expected to see him again. For years, the thought of his return was only a dream that hurt too much to think about. But on this day, something changed. A shadow appeared at the edge of the ranch, and in that moment, hearts stopped, because the impossible was walking back into their lives. The wind moved softly through the open fields of Heartland Ranch. The horses grazed quietly, their calm movements hiding the storms that had passed through this family. It had been years since Ty Borden's absence left a hole in their lives, a hole that could never truly be filled. Amy had tried to carry on. She had buried herself in her work with the horses, her hands steady but her heart always heavy. Every time she looked across the pasture, she half expected to see him walking toward her, smiling the way he used to. But that vision never came. Until now. Jack had been the anchor of the family, holding everyone together when grief threatened to pull them apart. He had watched Amy push herself harder than ever, always trying to be strong for everyone else. But he knew the truth, she was still carrying the weight of Ty's absence every single day. Lou had stepped into her role as the glue of the family, keeping the ranch running, managing the challenges of her own life, and protecting her loved ones from falling apart. Georgie, once the bright and fearless girl chasing dreams, had faced her own battles with loss. And Tim had never been the best at showing his feelings, but even he couldn't hide the fact that Ty's absence left a shadow over him. Life at the ranch had settled into a rhythm, one without Ty. The mornings began with feeding the horses, fixing fences, and the usual chatter of family life, but there was always something missing. Every birthday, every holiday, every quiet evening under the stars, his absence was there, unspoken but deeply felt. And though time had passed, the pain had never truly faded. Still, life moved forward. Amy trained horses, Lou balanced work and family, Georgie prepared for her next competition, and Jack made sure the ranch stayed standing. Tim kept busy with work, perhaps to avoid sitting still long enough to feel the weight of the past. But, no matter how much they filled their days, the memories were always close. The laughter, the shared dreams, the unspoken promises. On this particular morning, everything seemed ordinary. The sun rose over the hills, casting a warm golden light over the land. The family went about their chores, the sound of hooves and the creak of barn doors blending into the peaceful soundtrack of ranch life. But sometimes, life changes in a single moment. Sometimes, the ordinary morning becomes the one you'll never forget. And on this morning, a quiet change was beginning. A change no one could see yet, but one that would shake the heart of the ranch to its core. The day began like any other. The kind of morning that made Heartland feel timeless. The air was cool but carried the promise of a warm afternoon. Birds called from the fence posts, and the horses in the corral shifted lazily, waiting for their feed. Amy moved between the stalls with quiet focus, her hands working automatically as she brushed down Spartan. Each stroke of the brush was steady, but her thoughts were far away, lost in the routine she knew so well. Jack was in the yard, his hat pulled low against the sun. He checked the fence line, running a gloved hand over the worn wood. It was a job he'd done countless times. But today, there was something different in the way he paused now and then, glancing toward the long driveway that stretched out toward the main road. He didn't know why he kept looking. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was hope. Lou sat at the kitchen table, sorting through paperwork. Her coffee had gone cold beside her, untouched. She sighed, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The ranch books weren't going to balance themselves, but lately, she found it harder to concentrate. Every so often, she'd glance out the window at Amy in the yard, noticing how her sister's shoulders seemed heavier these days. Georgie was in the arena, working with Phoenix. The steady rhythm of hooves on dirt filled the air as she guided him through a series of jumps. She looked strong and confident, but inside, she still carried the ache of someone who had once been a big part of her life. She'd learned to keep moving, to push through. But that didn't mean she'd stopped wishing for things to be different. Tim's truck rumbled into the yard. Dust trailing behind it, he stepped out, grabbing his hat from the passenger seat. He had a list of things to do: fix a gate, check the cattle, but before he started, he took a moment to watch the family at work. There was pride there, but also something unspoken. He didn't talk about it, but the absence of Ty still sat between him and the rest of the family, like an uninvited guest that never left. Somewhere beyond the hills, a truck engine hummed, faint and distant. At first, it was barely noticeable. just a sound that blended into the background. But Jack's head lifted, his eyes narrowing toward the road. Amy didn't notice. Lou didn't notice. Even Tim was too far across the yard to hear it yet. Only Jack stood still, listening. The sound grew closer. Tires crunched over the gravel road leading to the ranch. A faint cloud of dust began to rise. In the distance, just visible above the fence line, Jack's chest tightened. He didn't know why, but something inside him whispered that this wasn't just another delivery truck or a neighbor stopping by. Amy was still brushing Spartan when Spartan's ears pricked forward. The horse turned his head toward the road, shifting restlessly. Amy followed his gaze, squinting toward the faint movement in the distance. The sunlight made it hard to see, but she could just make out the shape of a vehicle coming closer. Lou's pen stilled over the paperwork. From her seat in the kitchen, she caught sight of the dust trail through the window. She frowned, leaning forward for a better look. Georgie slowed Phoenix to a trot, her eyes following the same direction. Tim stopped mid-step, his brow furrowing. The truck rolled closer, the sound of its engine now filling the air. The family didn't move, each of them rooted where they stood. No one spoke. No one dared to guess who it might be, but deep down, some part of them, the part that had learned to stop hoping, began to stir again. And then, the truck slowed at the entrance to the yard. The sunlight caught on the windshield, hiding the driver's face. The engine cut off, leaving the air thick and silent. Jack took one slow step forward, his voice low but steady. Could it be? No one answered. The door of the truck opened with a creak, and a single boot stepped out onto the dirt. Something inside Amy's chest tightened. Her breath caught, and for the first time in years, she didn't just imagine him. The air felt heavier now, as if the ranch itself was holding its breath. The figure stepped out from behind the truck door, slow and deliberate, first the boots, then the jeans, and finally, the face. Amy's heart stopped. For a split second, she couldn't move, couldn't think. The world around her, the horses, the wind, the sound of Lou's footsteps on the porch, all faded into silence. It was him, Ty Borden. He stood there, the same yet different. His hair a little longer, his face marked by lines that spoke of years lived far away from this place. His eyes searched the yard, scanning each familiar face, almost afraid of what he might see, or not see, in their expressions. Jack was the first to react. His breath caught in his throat, and the weight of years pressed down on him in that one moment. He had told himself for so long that this day would never come, that it was better to let go than to keep breaking his heart with hope. But hope, it seemed, had been waiting quietly for this moment all along. He took another step forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. Amy's hands trembled. She took a small step toward him, then another, her eyes locked on his, as if afraid that looking away might make him disappear. A tear slipped down her cheek before she even realized she was crying. Lou's hand covered her mouth. She had seen many surprises in her life, faced challenges that tested every part of her, but nothing could have prepared her for this sight. She stepped off the porch slowly, each step heavier than the last, as if moving through a dream. Georgie froze beside Phoenix, one hand gripping the reins. Her mind raced back to the moments Ty had been there for her, teaching her, supporting her, believing in her when she doubted herself. It was like seeing a piece of her life come back from the shadows. Even Tim, who had never been quick to show emotion, felt his chest tighten. He swallowed hard, staring at Ty as if trying to convince himself it wasn't a trick of the light. Ty took a deep breath, his voice quiet but carrying across the yard. "Hey, everyone." It wasn't much, just two simple words, but they broke something open inside each of them. Amy couldn't hold back any longer. She closed the distance between them in quick, almost stumbling steps, and then she was in his arms. The years apart melted away in that embrace, the grief, the silence, the aching space between them. Jack stepped closer, placing a steady hand on Ty's shoulder. His voice was rough, cracked with emotion. "Welcome home, son." Lou reached them next, her arms wrapping around both Amy and Ty, holding on as if letting go would send him away again. Georgie joined, her tears mixing with laughter, unable to stop smiling through the sobs. Tim stood back for a moment longer, his arms crossed. Then, without a word, he stepped forward, pulling Ty into a firm embrace. It was brief, but it carried the weight of years unsaid. Asterisk the ranch felt different now. The air seemed warmer, the light softer. Somewhere in the distance, a horse neighed, almost as if the animals themselves knew that a missing part of Heartland had returned. Asterisk. They didn't speak much in those first few minutes. They didn't need to. The silence was filled with the sound of breathing, of hands gripping tightly, of hearts beating faster than they had in years. Asterisk for the first time in a long time. The Bartlett-Fleming family felt whole again. Asterisk the embrace lingered for what felt like forever. No one wanted to be the first to let go. It wasn't just a reunion, it was the undoing of years of pain. Asterisk Amy stepped back slightly, still holding onto Ty's arm as if to make sure he was real. She studied his face, noticing the small changes, the faint scars, the tiredness in his eyes, but also the things that hadn't changed at all. The way he looked at her, like she was still the most important part of his world, made her chest ache with both joy and relief. Asterisk Jack's weathered hands rested on his hips now, but his eyes stayed on Ty, almost afraid that if he looked away, the young man might vanish again. "You've got a lot of explaining to do," Jack said softly, but there was no anger in his tone. It was half a joke, half the truth, and all heart. Asterisk Lou wiped at her eyes, smiling through the tears. "I don't care how you're here right now. I'm just glad you are." She gave him another quick hug, like she was making sure the first one wasn't just her imagination. Asterisk Georgie still stood close, leaning lightly against Phoenix. She didn't say much, but her expression said everything. The wide, almost disbelieving smile, the glistening eyes. When she finally spoke, it was a simple, shaky, "You're really here." Asterisk Tim, who had stepped back again after their brief embrace, looked down for a moment before meeting Ty's gaze. "You've got some guts, showing up like this," he said, his voice steady but his jaw tight. It sounded like criticism, but everyone knew it was Tim's way of saying he cared. Asterisk, they all stood there for a while, caught between the desire to ask 1,000 questions and the need to just exist in this moment. The ranch was still, the wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the smell of hay and dust. Somewhere, a horse stomped in the barn, impatient for its next meal. But no one moved to feed it just yet. Asterisk finally, Jack gestured toward the house. "Come on in. You can tell us everything over coffee." His voice was calm, but his hand stayed on Ty's shoulder, guiding him toward the porch like he was afraid to lose him again. Asterisk inside, the kitchen felt warmer than usual. Lou poured coffee for everyone, her hands still trembling slightly. Amy sat close to Ty at the table, their knees touching under the wood. She didn't say much, but every so often she would reach out, resting her fingers lightly on his arm, as if she still couldn't believe he was there. Asterisk, Georgie leaned against the counter, sipping slowly, her eyes never straying far from him. Tim stayed standing near the door, arms crossed, watching the way everyone else surrounded Ty. Asterisk, the questions began. But they came gently where he'd been. What had happened? Why now? Ty didn't have all the answers yet, or maybe he wasn't ready to share them all. But it didn't matter. He was here, and for now, that was enough. Asterisk, as the sunlight shifted through the kitchen window, touching each of their faces, there was a sense that the ranch had changed. Not because the work was different, or the land was any less demanding, but because the heart of it, the part that had been missing, was back. Asterisk, for the first time in years, laughter slipped into their voices again. It wasn't loud or careless, it was soft, tentative, but it was there. And with it came something even more precious, hope. Asterisk, later, when the day had settled into evening and the sky turned gold, Amy stepped out onto the porch with Ty. They didn't speak much, they just watched the horses in the field, the familiar landscape stretching out before them. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of everything they hadn't said yet, and everything they still would. Asterisk, for the Bartlett-Fleming family, this wasn't just a reunion, it was the beginning of something new. Asterisk, and in the quiet of the Heartland evening, with the sun dipping low and the shadows stretching long, they knew one thing for certain: sometimes miracles do happen. Asterisk, the sun had nearly set, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. The ranch seemed quieter than usual, as if it understood the weight of the day. Inside the house, soft voices carried through the air, laughter mixing with the low murmur of conversation, the kind that comes when hearts are beginning to heal. Asterisk, Amy glanced across the room at Ty, and for a moment, time seemed to fold in on itself. All the days without him, all the nights spent wondering, all the silent prayers they had led to this. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. None of them did. But for now, that didn't matter. Jack sat back in his chair, his coffee growing cold again. He wasn't thinking about chores or fence repairs. He was thinking about the way Hope had walked back into their lives without warning. Lou leaned against the counter, smiling in that tired but content way that only came when you knew your family was whole again. Georgie sat cross-legged on the floor, talking quietly to Ty about horses, competitions, and everything she'd been doing while he was gone. Even Tim, standing in the corner, looked different, softer somehow, though he'd never admit it. The truth was, none of them had truly moved on. They had learned to live with the gap Ty left, but that gap had always been there. And now, it wasn't. Outside, the horses shifted in the fading light. The sound of hooves against the dirt grounding the moment in something real. It was as if the land itself had been waiting for this day. Because this wasn't just the return of a man. It was the return of a piece of their hearts. A reminder that love and family can outlast distance, time, and even the deepest pain. Sometimes, life gives you back what you thought was gone forever. And when it does, you hold on tight. What about you? If you've ever waited for someone to come home, if you've ever had a moment when hope felt impossible but still found its way back, you understand what the Bartlett-Fleming family felt today. Share your thoughts below. Tell us what you would say if you were standing there when Ty stepped out of that truck. Because this story, it isn't just theirs, it's for anyone who believes in second chances.